The base was silent, except for the hum of generators and the distant thud of helicopters preparing for another night's flight. Inside a dimly lit command tent, 12 Navy SEALs sat around a table covered with maps, satellite photos, and hastily drawn sketches. A projector flickered, displaying grainy images of a mountain valley somewhere on the edge of a hostile border. The men leaned forward, shoulders tense, every eye locked on the intelligence officer giving the briefing. The smell of burnt coffee and sweat lingered in the air, mixing with the faint scent of oil from their weapons. "Target is here," the officer said, tapping a red circle on the map. "We've confirmed a fortified enemy unit in the pass. Roughly 25 fighters. Heavily armed, well-trained. They've dug in with high ground advantage. If they launch from here, they'll have a straight shot at our supply lines. We can't let that happen." The SEALs nodded silently. The information wasn't new, but hearing it laid out this way made the danger feel heavier. The mission was classified as essential to national security. In military terms, that meant success wasn't optional. It was survival, not just for the team, but for countless others, depending on the supply lines. At the end of the table sat Lieutenant Commander Harris, the team leader, a man whose scarred jaw and calm voice carried the weight of years in combat. "We've done worse with less," he said evenly. "We insert at night, move under cover of darkness, snipers secure the ridges, assault team sweeps the valley. We catch them before they know what's coming." It was meant to reassure, but the words rang hollow for some. The intelligence photos showed camouflaged bunkers, heavy machine guns, and suspicious dark patches that looked like possible sniper nests. Still, Harris had led them through impossible odds before. His voice carried authority, and the men trusted him. Among the operators sat Petty Officer First Class Elena Ramirez. At 29, she wasn't the largest or the loudest in the room, but she carried herself with a quiet confidence that demanded respect. Dark hair was tied tightly at the nape of her neck, and her brown eyes didn't waver as she studied the terrain map. She had been in fire before, and her reputation was one of focus under pressure. No panic, no wasted movement, no hesitation. For her, this mission wasn't about medals or recognition. She thought of the villages beyond those mountains, places she had patrolled, children she had seen playing barefoot in dusty streets. She thought of the Americans who would be targeted if this unit wasn't stopped. For her, the mission was personal. "Questions?" Harris asked. Silence answered him. The men exchanged glances, some tight with anticipation, others with the calm detachment of soldiers long accustomed to dangerous orders. Then the room shifted from planning to preparation. Outside, under the stars, the SEALs moved to their gear. With the ritual precision of warriors who had done this countless times before. Magazines were loaded, scopes adjusted, radios checked, blades sharpened. They wore the knight-like armor, their black uniforms blending into the shadows. The air was cool, but adrenaline warmed their veins. Ramirez tightened the straps on her plate carrier, fingers steady despite the storm brewing inside her. She checked her rifle twice, then slung it across her chest, adjusting the sling for easy maneuvering. Her sidearm rested on her hip, and a combat knife was strapped to her thigh. She moved methodically, every motion deliberate. Preparation was her way of silencing doubt. Nearby, the designated snipers, Petty Officers Dalton and Reeves, joked quietly as they checked their long-range rifles. Dalton grinned. "One shot, one kill. We'll clean up before you guys even get there." Reeves chuckled, but there was an edge in his tone. "Don't get cocky. High ground works both ways." Ramirez caught the exchange and allowed herself the faintest smile. Their confidence was typical, almost comforting. Snipers were the angels of Overwatch, the unseen guardians. Few missions failed with good snipers in position, and these two were among the best. Minutes later, the team assembled at the helicopter, pad blades chopping the night air as a Black Hawk waited to carry them into the mountains. Harris gave one last look over his team. Faces hidden behind night vision goggles and paint, bodies weighed with gear, but spirits sharp. "Remember," Harris said over the roar, "speed and silence. We strike fast, we strike hard. No mistakes." The helicopter lifted into the night, the base shrinking into darkness below. The wind whipped against their helmets, the vibrations rattling through their bones. Inside the fuselage, the SEALs sat shoulder to shoulder, rifles resting between their knees. No one spoke. Each man and woman was lost in thought, replaying training, steadying nerves, preparing for the unknown. Ramirez closed her eyes for a moment, shutting out the noise. She focused on her breathing, steady inhales and exhales, grounding herself. She thought of her family back home, the promise she had made to return. She thought of the words from her mentor years ago. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite it. The helicopter descended after an hour, skimming low over jagged ridges. The pilot's voice came over the headset. "Landing zone secure. 30 seconds. Boots hit the ground in silence as the SEALs disembarked, spreading quickly into formation. The night air was thin and biting, filled with the scent of dust and pine. The mountains loomed like dark sentinels, their jagged edges cutting against the stars. The valley below waited, cloaked in shadow. Dalton and Reeves broke off, scaling the rocky ridge with practiced ease, rifles slung across their backs. They moved like hunters returning to familiar ground, every step calculated, every stone avoided. From those heights, they would command the battlefield. The rest of the team advanced cautiously, using hand signals, eyes scanning every shadow. Silence pressed heavy, broken only by the crunch of boots against loose gravel. The enemy had not yet stirred, but the silence felt wrong. Too complete, too expectant. Ramirez walked near the rear, her senses alive, every nerve alert. Her instincts whispered a warning, faint but insistent. She had learned long ago to trust those whispers. Something in the valley felt off. Too quiet, too easy. She looked up, toward the ridges where the snipers would soon take position, and for the first time that night, a chill ran down her spine. The mission had just begun, and already it felt impossible. The mountain air grew colder as the team ascended, their breaths visible in faint white streams beneath the glow of their night vision goggles. The terrain was unforgiving, jagged rocks cutting through their gloves as they climbed narrow ridges. The valley stretched below them like a black scar across the earth, its silence unsettling. Somewhere down there, the enemy waited, unseen, patient, deadly. Petty Officer Dalton reached the crest first. He crouched low, easing his pack onto the ground before sliding his long rifle free. Reeves followed, slower but steady, his eyes already scanning the dark landscape. The two men exchanged a glance, a silent nod. They had worked together for years, their bond forged in countless missions where timing and trust meant survival. "Angle looks clean," Dalton whispered over comms, adjusting the bipod of his rifle on a flat rock. "We've got sight lines on the valley approach and the north ridge." "Copy." Harris's voice came back in a low tone. "Establish overwatch. We move on your green light." The rest of the team crouched lower in the valley's shadow, waiting. The assault group knew the snipers were their shield, their unseen protectors watching from above. Every man relied on that overwatch, on the knowledge that someone was up there scanning, calculating, ready to eliminate threats before they could take form. Dalton pressed his cheek against the stock, peering through the scope. His world narrowed into green-tinted clarity. He adjusted focus, sweeping across the valley. At first, he saw nothing but rocks and shadows. Then faint movements. 2 figures near a bunker entrance, rifles slung lazily over their shoulders. Enemy sentries. Dalton slowed his breathing, centered the crosshairs on one man's chest, and whispered, 2 tangos. Bunker north entrance. Easy shots. Reeves mirrored him, his own rifle finding the second figure. On your mark, Dalton exhaled. 3, 2, 1. 2 muffled cracks split the night. Both enemy guards dropped before they had the chance to react, bodies collapsing soundlessly into the dirt. The mission had begun. Bunker guards neutralized, Dalton reported. Good work, Harris replied. Team, advance. Keep it tight. Down below, the assault team moved forward, crouching low, rifles raised. The valley swallowed them whole, the darkness clinging to their movements. Every step seemed louder than it should have been, crunching against gravel, rushing through brittle shrubs. They relied on the snipers' calm voices to cut through the tension. Ramirez moved near the middle of the formation, her eyes shifting constantly between the ridges above and the shadows around them. She trusted Dalton and Reeves. They were professionals, steady under fire, unflinching when the stakes were highest. Still, unease stirred in her chest. The valley was too quiet. She had patrolled combat zones long enough to know when silence was a trap. Sniper 1 to Overwatch. Dalton's voice broke through the headset. No further movement. Area. Looks clear. Copy, Harris said. Keep scanning. Reeves adjusted his scope, tracing along a jagged ridge to the east. He frowned. Could have sworn I saw a reflection, maybe glass. Might have been nothing. Dalton smirked. You're seeing ghosts again. Relax, we've got this. Reeves didn't answer right away. He swept the ridge again. Slower this. Time, eyes narrowing. There, a flicker, faint but real. He leaned closer, heartbeat quickening. Wait, hold up. I'm seeing something. Possible optics glare, 2 o'clock high. Before he could confirm, the night erupted. The crack of a rifle echoed across the valley, louder than thunder in the still air. Dalton's head snapped back, his body collapsing against the rock. Reeves froze, stunned, until instinct yanked him behind cover. Sniper down. Sniper down, he shouted over comms. His hands shook as he reached for Dalton, but the lifeless stare told him all he needed to know. The assault team below froze in horror, then chaos ignited. Gunfire erupted from unseen positions, bullets tearing into the valley with terrifying precision. Ramirez dove behind a boulder, her heart slamming in her chest. Her worst fear had been right. They weren't the hunters. They were the hunted. The first shot that killed Dalton was only the beginning. Reeves pressed himself flat against the rocks, his mind racing, his lungs burning with rapid breaths. Dalton's blood pooled dark beneath him, spreading across the stone. Reeves had no time to mourn. He adjusted his scope, desperately scanning the ridgeline across the valley. He caught glimpses of muzzled flashes, brief, sharp sparks in the darkness. Then more cracks rang out. Another SEAL dropped below, a scream cutting short as his body collapsed into the dust. Contact! Contact! We're under fire. Harris's voice barked through the comms. Multiple shooters, get to cover. The valley exploded with noise. Bullets hissed through the air, tearing into boulders, ricocheting with metallic whines. The SEALs scrambled, scattering for any cover they could find. What moments before had been disciplined formation now dissolved into survival. Ramirez threw herself behind a slab of rock, feeling shards cut across her cheek as a round slammed into the stone inches from her face. She pressed flat, her rifle clutched tight against her chest. Her ears rang with the deafening roar of overlapping gunfire. This isn't random fire, she realized. The shots weren't wild or desperate. They were surgical, deliberate. Whoever they faced was trained, organized, and watching their every move. Reeves tried to return fire, his hands steadying despite the chaos. He squeezed off 2 shots. At a glint of movement, but no target fell. The enemy was too well concealed, their firing points perfectly chosen. Reeves cursed under his breath. They're on the high ground. They knew we were coming. Pull back, Harris ordered. Smoke out and fall to secondary cover. Grenades hissed as smoke spread across the valley floor, clouds of white and gray billowing upward. The SEALs dashed between shadows, dragging the wounded, firing blindly to suppress the invisible attackers. But the enemy's aim cut through the haze like knives. One more sniper fell, his body tumbling limp across the rocks. The coms filled, with fragmented voices, shouting, overlapping, and silence as channels went dead. Operators who had been alive seconds earlier were now gone, erased in flashes of gunfire. Ramirez stayed low, forcing her breathing to steady. Her instincts screamed at her. This was a setup. They wanted us here. She gritted her teeth, peering out from her cover. Through the haze, she saw a shadowy figure dart across an upper ridge. She raised her rifle and fired. The shadow dropped, and for one fleeting moment, she felt control. But then 3 more muzzle flashes answered back, forcing her head down. Reeves' voice crackled through the headset, strained and panicked. They've got counter-snipers, multiple positions. There. They're hunting us. Another SEAL screamed in agony before. His radio cut out. The valley, once quiet and ominous, now rang with chaos. Bullets chewed into dirt and stone, spraying fragments. Men groaned, cried out, or went eerily silent. Harris tried to rally them, his voice strong but edged with desperation. Hold positions, return fire, we will not be overrun. But even he knew the truth. Their tactical advantage was gone. Ramirez clenched her jaw, forcing herself to move. She crawled from one boulder to another, each motion deliberate, using the smoke and terrain for cover. A wounded teammate lay ahead, blood pooling beneath his leg. She grabbed his arm and dragged him into shelter, ignoring the searing pain in her muscles. "You're good," she told him, her voice calm despite the storm. "Stay with me?" He nodded weakly, gripping her hand before she set him down. Overhead, Reeves fought to maintain his position. He adjusted, fired again, clipped one enemy shooter, then shifted quickly before the return fire shredded the rock around him. Shards cut his cheek and arm, but he stayed focused. Still, he could feel the noose tightening. Every time he moved, they tracked him faster. He was running out of angles, out of cover. "Sniper 2 to command," Reeves hissed. "We need extraction. We can't hold this." There was no answer, only static. The realization hit like a blow. Their comms were being jammed. The enemy wasn't just stronger. They were smarter. Ramirez crouched low, gripping her rifle, her heart pounding so hard it shook her chest. Around her, the team was shrinking. Fewer voices on comms, fewer figures moving through the haze. She glanced up toward the ridges where Dalton and Reeves had once given them security. Dalton was gone. Reeves was barely surviving. Their guardians in the sky had been turned into prey. The mission that began with confidence had unraveled into catastrophe. And still, the shots kept coming. By the time the gunfire briefly died down, the valley was littered with bodies. Smoke drifted through the air, mixing with the acrid stench of gunpowder and blood. Silence returned, but it wasn't the silence of safety. It was the silence of loss. The SEALs had walked into a trap, and their greatest strength, their snipers, had been dismantled first. In the dirt, Ramirez gripped her rifle tighter. Her jaw was set, her eyes burning with both fear and fury. She refused to let despair take root, even as the words of one survivor echoed through the cums like a funeral bell. God's not our side. Smoke still hung in the valley like a ghost refusing to leave. The last echoes of gunfire faded into silence, leaving only the rasp of strained breathing and the occasional groan of the wounded. The SEALs had taken cover wherever they could, behind jagged rocks, inside shallow craters, pressed against the earth itself as though willing themselves to vanish. They had started the night with 12. Now, only 7 remained standing, scattered and bleeding. Lieutenant Commander Harris crouched low, his helmet tilted downward, his radio hissing static. He tapped it once, twice, as if willing a response. Nothing came back. The enemy's signal jamming was absolute. They were blind, deaf, and alone. "Status check," he ordered, his voice hoarse but steady. "Call in." One by one, broken. Voices answered. Bravo 6 up. Bravo 9, wounded but alive. Bravo 11, gone. The pauses between each call twisted in their stomachs like knives. Ramirez pressed her back to a rock, her rifle balanced across her knees. Her cheek stung where shrapnel had grazed her, a thin line of blood dripping toward her jaw. She ignored it. Pain could wait. She listened to the roll call and counted the silence more than the voices. Dalton was dead. Reeves was pinned, still alive on the ridge, but his cums were fading. Others had fallen without even a final word. A low voice broke the silence, sharp with bitterness. "God's not on our side tonight." The words came from Petty Officer King, the youngest of the group. He sat clutching his rifle, his eyes wide and wild. His hands shook so violently, he nearly dropped his weapon. Ramirez looked at him, her expression unreadable. Harris snapped back. "Shut it, King. We're not dead yet." But King wasn't alone. His words spread like infection. The operators glanced at each other in the darkness, their silence confirming what none wanted to admit. They were outmatched. Their elite snipers were gone. Their cums were cut. Their mission was shattered before it had even begun. The quiet wasn't safety. It was anticipation. Everyone knew the enemy was still out there, watching, waiting for the next mistake. Ramirez tightened her grip on her rifle, grounding herself. Fear clawed at her edges, but she had long ago learned how to cage it. Fear could paralyze, but it could also sharpen. She focused on the rhythm of her breathing. In and out, steady. Controlled. King's words gnawed at her, though. She thought of the families waiting for news, of the villages that would burn if the enemy slipped past them, of the teammates who had already died. If God wasn't on their side, then maybe God had nothing to do with it. Maybe survival rested on something else: skill, willpower, and the refusal to surrender. A sudden noise jolted them. A faint click, the scrape of stone above. Instinct took over. Ramirez swung her rifle upward, finger poised on the trigger. A silhouette shifted. On the ridge, she fired. The figure toppled, crashing down the slope in a tangle of limbs. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Harris looked at her and gave the smallest nod, a rare acknowledgement. The team drew in tighter, huddled against the rocks. Whispered arguments broke out. Some wanted to retreat, to fall back, toward the extraction point. Others argued they'd never make it across open ground with countersnipers still in place. Harris tried to keep order, but the cracks in morale widened. Ramirez said nothing. She watched. She listened. She let their panic play out, but inside her mind, something different was taking shape. Where the others saw defeat, she began mapping opportunity. Every muzzle flash she'd marked, every shadow that moved, every angle where bullets had struck, she was building a mental map of the battlefield. The enemy had the high ground, yes, but overconfidence had its price. She leaned closer to Harris. They think we're broken. That's their mistake? Harris studied her, his jaw tight. He didn't argue. Another voice rose from the dark. Trembling but defiant. We can't stay here. They'll finish us off at first light. Ramirez looked at them all, her voice calm, but carrying weight. Then we don't wait for them to come to us. The others stared. It wasn't bravado. It wasn't false hope. It was steel, cold, sharp, unbending. For the first time since the ambush began, the poison of despair wavered. The doubt hadn't vanished, but it had met something stronger. As the night deepened, the seals shifted restlessly in the shadows, caught between fear and determination. King still muttered under his breath. Harris still fought to hold his team together, but the mood had changed. They weren't saved. They weren't even close, but they weren't finished either. And in the middle of it all, Ramirez sat silently with her rifle across her lap, her eyes hard and unyielding. The others didn't know it yet, but she was already shaping the fight to come. If God wasn't on their side, then she would be. The night pressed down like a living thing. Smoke from earlier clashes still lingered in pockets across the valley, curling low over the rocks and making the air heavy with the taste of gunpowder. Every sound, the shift of boots on gravel, the click of a rifle bolt, felt amplified, raw against the suffocating silence. The seals, reduced and shaken, crouched in scattered clusters, their nerves stretched thin. Harris knelt with his back against a slab of stone, his radio still, spitting useless static. His face was shadowed beneath his helmet, but the tension in his jaw was unmistakable. Around him, the men whispered in sharp bursts, arguments about retreat, about waiting, about survival. No one dared speak loudly. The ridges above felt alive with enemy eyes. Ramirez crouched a short distance away, listening. She said nothing, but every word they exchanged sharpened the blade of her thoughts. Extraction's a no-go, one operator hissed. We'll never make it across the open ground. Then we stay and die here? King snapped back. His voice trembled with both fear and anger. They're not going to stop until we're all gone. They're trained like us, another added, quieter. Maybe better. We can't win this fight. The words sank into the earth like poison. Ramirez felt them in her chest, the weight of despair settling deeper. She knew the statistics. Ambushes at night, high ground lost, numbers dwindling. The odds were beyond grim. And yet, something inside her refused to let go. She shifted her weight, adjusting her rifle across her lap, and scanned the ridges again. Every muzzle flash she had seen earlier, every sniper shot, every angle where bullets had struck. She replayed them in her mind. A map was forming, not on paper, but etched into instinct. She didn't see only danger. She saw opportunity. When the whispers reached Harris, he raised a hand. Enough. His voice carried quiet authority. We hold position until daylight. We find a way to regroup. Nobody moves alone. For a moment, silence followed. The men nodded reluctantly. Staying put felt safer, even if every instinct screamed otherwise. But Ramirez's jaw tightened. She had been in too many firefights to mistake inaction for safety. If they waited, the enemy would finish them by dawn. They weren't holding a line. They were sitting in a grave. She stepped forward. No, she said simply. The word cut through the air like a blade. The men turned to her, startled. Harris's eyes narrowed. Ramirez, this isn't the time. It's exactly the time, she interrupted her. Voice calm but unyielding. She looked each of them in the eye. If we stay here, we're dead. You know it. They know it. We're in their kill box, and they're not going to give us another chance. The only way out is to take the fight to them. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by King's bitter laugh. You? Alone? You'll get slaughtered. Before you make 10 feet, Ramirez didn't flinch. She pulled the map from Harris's pack, flattening it against the rock. With the tip of her knife, she traced the ridges, the suspected enemy nests, the bunker. They're overconfident. They think we're broken. That's their mistake. They've been firing from fixed positions, predictable positions. They're not expecting anyone to come at them. Not now. Her finger tapped a ridge on the far side. I move here, flank them, cut them out piece by piece. You stay low, hold their attention. They'll never see it coming. The men stared at her as though she had lost her mind. The plan was insane. It was suicide. And yet, as she spoke, her tone carried none of the panic that had plagued the others. Her words were steel, not reckless, not desperate, but deliberate. Harris studied her in silence. He had led missions across the world, had seen bravery, fear, and madness in equal measure. But what he saw in Ramirez now was different. Her determination wasn't wild or impulsive. It was precise. You'd go alone? He asked finally. Yes, she said. Because someone has to. The others shifted uncomfortably. Some muttered under their breath, calling it foolish. Others watched her in stunned silence. But none could deny the spark in her eyes. For the first time since the ambush began, someone was speaking with certainty. King shook his head, his voice cracking. This isn't courage, it's suicide. Ramirez turned to him. Maybe, but if I do nothing, we all die anyway. At least this way, we have a chance. The words hung in the cold air, heavier than the smoke. She pulled her gear tighter, checked her rifle, adjusted the strap of her knife. Every motion was calm, efficient, like she was preparing for a drill rather than stepping into a death sentence. Her pulse was steady, her breathing controlled. Fear lived inside her, but it was caged, fueling her resolve instead of weakening. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Harris leaned back, exhaling slowly. You don't have orders for this. I don't need them, she said. I just need a target. Harris gave a short, grim nod. He didn't agree, but he didn't stop her. He knew there was no point. Some choices weren't made by orders. They were made by will. Ramirez slung her rifle across her shoulder, grabbed extra magazines, and crawled toward the edge of cover. Her silhouette melted into the smoke and shadow, becoming one with the darkness. As the men watched her disappear into the night, a silence settled over them. For the first time in hours, it wasn't the silence of despair. It was the silence of awe. King whispered under his breath, almost to himself, "She's crazy." Harris shook his head. "No, she's what's left." Ramirez slipped into the darkness, every step measured, every movement silent. The ridges loomed above her, crawling with enemies who thought victory was already theirs. They didn't know death was coming for them, carried in the resolve of one soldier who refused to bow. Back in the valley, the SEALs huddled in the shadows, their fear momentarily stilled. For the first time since the ambush began, hope flickered, faintly in the ashes of defeat. Because if God wasn't on their side, maybe Ramirez was enough. Night draped itself across the mountains, like a living curtain, thick and suffocating. Every shadow was a potential enemy, every ridge a vantage point for a sniper. Ramirez pressed herself flat against a jagged boulder, the cold stone biting into her palms through her gloves. Her rifle rested across her shoulder, scope adjusted for distance, silencer in place. Every sense was heightened, every heartbeat counted. She moved like water through the darkness, silent, careful, deliberate. The enemy believed they had won, that the valley was theirs and the survivors trapped. Overconfidence made them predictable. They were waiting for a fight they thought would come from her team's remnants in the valley, not from a single shadow slipping along their flanks. The first ridge she encountered was guarded lightly. Two figures crouched over what appeared to be a small radio array. They chatted in low tones, unaware of the danger stalking them. Ramirez calculated the distance, held her breath, and squeezed the trigger. A suppressed crack split the night, and one figure toppled silently. The other two startled to react before Ramirez rolled into the next patch of darkness. Her movements were fluid. She adapted to the terrain with practiced precision, adjusting her footing for loose gravel, sharp rocks, and steep inclines. Each step, each pause, was a decision. She traced enemy positions in her mind like a chessboard, predicting where they would expect threats and where they wouldn't. The smoke from the valley drifted upward, shrouding her approach, turning her invisibility into an ally. Ahead, a guard rotated, eyes sweeping the darkness, rifle held loosely. She froze, calculating timing. As his gaze passed, she slipped to his blind side and moved close enough to disarm him without firing. One swift motion, a throw, and the enemy crumpled silently into the brush. She dragged him behind a rock, securing him in case of reinforcements, and continued. Her mind ran a constant loop of observation, calculation, and execution. Every step minimized risk while maximizing impact. She used shadows, terrain, and enemy habits to her advantage. Every movement was deliberate, precise. She became an invisible predator, hunting the hunters who had so recently preyed upon her team. A faint light flickered ahead, a guard cigarette. Ramirez froze. The glow was brief, but enough to mark his position. She raised her rifle, calculating the distance and angle. The shot was clean. The guard collapsed without a sound. She rolled to cover and scanned the surrounding ridges, noting enemy reaction patterns. Every movement told a story. Every misstep she avoided gave her a growing sense of control. She moved closer to the main enemy stronghold, a bunker surrounded by sandbags and small watchposts. From the valley, it had seemed impenetrable. From the ridges, in shadow and silence, it was vulnerable. Ramirez crouched behind a crag, studying guard rotations, listening to whispered commands, calculating timing. She noted a weak point, a small gap in coverage caused by overconfidence. A sudden sound snapped her attention, a branch snapping under her foot. Her heart skipped, but she remained still, blending into the night. Two guards turned toward the noise. She held her breath, then shifted slightly to stay out of the angle of their vision. One passed. The other hesitated, scanning. Then, with precise timing, she used the terrain to her advantage, dropping silently behind the distracted guard and neutralizing him. The bunker itself loomed closer. She noticed ventilation openings, entry points, and blind spots. Even the guards inside didn't realize they were about to be hunted. Ramirez had become a ghost, unseen, unheard, and unstoppable. A voice inside her reminded her of the fallen SEALs, of Dalton and Reeves, of the men and women whose lives depended on this mission succeeding. She pressed forward, each kill and maneuver not for glory, but for survival and justice. Her rifle spoke for her, a tool of precision. Her movements were poetry in the deadly choreography of war. A sentry lit a lantern to check the perimeter. Ramirez froze in place, heart pounding, every muscle coiled. She watched its glow illuminate a patch of terrain. Time seemed to stretch, seconds elongating. Then she rolled to the edge of cover, rifle raised, and fired two quick, silent shots. The sentry dropped before he could call out. No one had seen her. No one had heard her. She used this pattern again and again, gradually weakening the enemy's outer defenses. Every shot, every movement, every distraction was carefully executed to ensure she remained undetected. Her mind ran constantly, assessing, adapting, predicting. She became the unseen force shaping the battlefield. Above her, the ridges trembled with the occasional sound of distant artillery fire or mortar echoes, but they were irrelevant. She moved undisturbed, using the noise to mask her own approach. The enemy was still formidable, but they were overconfident, careless in their belief that a single night ambush had left no threats remaining. A small patrol moved near her position. She paused, flattening against a rock as they passed. One turned briefly, lantern casting shadows across the terrain. She measured distance, angle, and timing. A single breath, a single shot, and the threat was gone. She waited, scanning for reaction. None came. Ramirez allowed herself the briefest of acknowledgments, just enough to confirm the pattern held. She was not invisible. She was inevitable. Every move drew her closer to the enemy unit's heart. Every maneuver weakened their defenses further. She paused near the edge of the ridge, looking down at the bunker. The enemy had grown restless. Guards doubled, weapons swept the ridges and valleys, but none knew that a single soldier had infiltrated their position. Ramirez's instincts were razor-sharp. Every shadow became an ally, every ridge a tool. She advanced with patience, precision, and deadly intent. From this vantage point, the enemy was beginning to show cracks in coordination, evidence of panic as one by one, their outer defenses fell without explanation. Ramirez noted each shift, each error, and adapted her plan. She had become the hunter, and the battlefield had become her ally. As the first light of dawn began to brush the mountains with gray, Ramirez had already neutralized a significant portion of the enemy perimeter. She paused, rifle raised, scanning for remaining targets. The valley below was quiet, almost unnaturally so. Her presence was still undetected. The enemy's confidence was crumbling. She allowed herself a single thought, almost a whisper to the wind. This is just the beginning. Dawn's first light bled slowly over the mountains, painting the valley in muted grays and cold gold. The enemy, still unaware of her presence, scrambled to assess the destruction at their perimeter. Their confidence, the arrogance that had marked their ambush hours earlier, was now a brittle mask. Ramirez moved silently along the ridge, rifle cradled, every step calculated to avoid loose stones or the snap of a twig. She paused at a ledge that overlooked a small bunker. 2 guards emerged, scanning for threats with the nervous tension of men, sensing danger but unable to see it. Her pulse was steady. She tracked their movements, calculating timing. One moved to the left. The other stayed near the doorway. She exhaled silently. The first shot was precise, muffled but deadly. The guard at the doorway crumpled before he could react. The other froze, confusion painted across his face. Ramirez didn't give him a chance to raise the alarm. A swift, silent strike, her combat knife ending the threat before he could scream. The inner bunker was dim, shadows pooling in corners. She pressed forward, body low, movements deliberate. She could hear the faint sound of someone fumbling with equipment, unaware of the silent predator in their midst. Another rifle, another life snuffed out in one calculated motion. The enemy had trained for battle, but not for invisibility, precision, and instinct. Ramirez had become the embodiment of all three. From the ridges above, other bunkers could be seen. Sandbags, tripwires, small watchposts, all defenses weakened by her infiltration. Every step she had taken had forced the enemy to react, shift, and misstep. Patterns emerged, mistakes multiplied, and Ramirez adapted with ruthless efficiency. She was alone, but she was unstoppable. She paused at a corner of the main bunker, listening. Footsteps echoed inside. 2 more guards approached a window, rifles ready, unaware of the danger beyond their vision. Ramirez's finger hovered over the trigger. Breath steady, she fired. Both figures fell silently, leaving no evidence of her presence. Below, the valley seemed calm, almost peaceful. But the stillness was deceptive. Every enemy in the bunker had been neutralized or distracted. Ramirez moved like a shadow, blending with the smoke and dawn light, stalking the remaining threats. With predator-like focus, her mind tracked every position, every remaining opponent. None had the advantage anymore. The tables had turned. She used the terrain, rocks, debris, natural folds in the mountainside, to conceal her approach. From every angle, she was undetectable, yet all-seeing. A pair of soldiers attempted to flank her position, likely thinking to reinforce the perimeter. Ramirez waited, timing their steps perfectly. A single suppressed shot, and one fell. She rolled behind cover, repositioning to intercept the second. Another precise shot, and the flanking threat was gone. Silence reclaimed the ridge, but now it was her silence. Inside the bunker, a radio squawked. Ramirez noted the voice trying to contact command, unaware that the operator was within meters of a lifeless body she had already dispatched. With a precise movement, she cut the communication line, leaving the enemy blind, isolated, and vulnerable. The enemy commander emerged from the main entrance, shouting orders. Panic was evident in his tone. The confidence of hours earlier dissolved. Ramirez crouched behind a rock, assessing the new target. A single shot from her sniper position, a clean, fatal strike, removed the leader, throwing the remaining unit into chaos. Confusion rippled through the enemy ranks. Soldiers fired blindly, attempting to locate the invisible threat. Ramirez used their frantic movements to her advantage. One by one, she picked off remaining guards, exploiting their mistakes, never hesitating, always precise. Her rifle, her knife, her instincts, each a weapon in a deadly symphony. From the valley below, the surviving SEALs heard the distant crack of rifle fire. They listened, hearts hammering, as it became clear. The woman they had feared would be lost was turning the tide alone. Harris whispered under his breath, all laced with disbelief. She's doing what? She's alone. The enemy tried to regroup, but Ramirez anticipated every maneuver. Every escape route was blocked. Every angle observed. One by one, they fell into her calculated trap. By the time the first hint of sunlight bathed the valley floor, the unit that had seemed unstoppable the night before lay defeated, scattered, broken. Ramirez emerged cautiously from her cover, scanning for any remaining threats. None came. The valley was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that only follows absolute destruction. She lowered her rifle, letting the adrenaline ebb just enough to breathe. Around her, the terrain bore the scars of her precision, bodies, discarded weapons, and the faint smell of smoke. Her eyes swept the area one final time. Every threat neutralized. The ambush that had claimed her comrades, that had shattered. The SEAL unit's confidence had been turned into her solitary triumph. She had done the impossible. She finally allowed herself a deep exhale. Fatigue clawed at her body, but there was a spark of something else. Fierce satisfaction, tempered with sorrow for those lost. She had survived, but she knew the cost. Dalton, Reeves, and the others had not. She had avenged them in her own way, rewriting the rules of the battlefield through skill, courage, and sheer determination. Ramirez moved carefully to the edge of the ridge, looking down at the valley. Smoke still rose from the destroyed positions, catching the light of dawn. The once deadly unit was now no threat. Her eyes, however, remained vigilant. She knew this. Victory was fragile, a pause in the chaos of war, but it was hers, earned alone. By the time Harris and the surviving SEALs made their cautious descent, Ramirez was already moving back toward them, scanning constantly for any remaining danger. The valley that had been a trap, a death sentence, was now conquered. Harris eyes widened when he finally saw her, rifle lowered, bloodied and bruised, but alive. He approached slowly, disbelief and awe evident in his stance. You did this alone?" he asked. Ramirez said nothing at first. She shook her head slowly, letting her presence speak. The impossible had been done, and she had carried it out alone. The SEALs looked at the silent battlefield, realizing that one soldier had rewritten destiny. The ambush had been defeated, and survival, against all odds, had been claimed. The valley was silent, the kind of silence that presses against your chest and refuses to leave. The smoke from destroyed positions drifted upward in thin, curling ribbons, catching the morning light in hues of orange and gray. The bodies of the fallen lay scattered, enemy and friend alike, a grim testament to the night's chaos. Ramirez moved carefully among the terrain, rifle slung low, scanning for any final threats. Her movements were no longer tense, but deliberate, measured, controlled. Every instinct that had kept her alive now guided her through the aftermath. Harris and the surviving SEALs emerged from the ridges above, faces etched with disbelief and relief. They moved cautiously, watching for ambushes, but Ramirez had cleared the battlefield. As they drew closer, Harris' eyes locked on her, widening with a mixture of awe and incomprehension. You did all of this alone?" he asked, his voice breaking slightly. Ramirez shook her head slowly, exhaustion visible in the slump of her shoulders, but not in her expression. "I did what had to be done," she said quietly, almost to herself. Her eyes swept over the valley, taking in the destruction she had wrought, the lives that had ended, and the ghosts of those who had fallen on both sides. King, the youngest of the surviving SEALs, moved closer, his eyes wide and haunted. I thought we were done for. All of us. How did you—" His voice faltered. "Focus saved us," Ramirez said, her tone steady. Precision, patience, and never assuming the fight was over until it actually was. The men exchanged glances. For hours they had feared the worst, assumed death was inevitable. Yet here stood Ramirez, alive, unbroken, and victorious. Her skill had rewritten the outcome of the night, transforming defeat into triumph. Harris stepped forward, finally regaining his composure. "You've just done what an entire team couldn't. You've saved lives tonight. Every one of us owes you." Ramirez offered a faint nod, not seeking praise. The moment wasn't about recognition. It was about survival, about the mission, about honor. She scanned the valley one last time, ensuring no enemy remained, before allowing herself to exhale fully. The survivors moved cautiously among the fallen, administering first aid to the wounded, checking radios, and gathering equipment. The weight of loss pressed upon them. Dalton, Reeves, and others would not return home. Ramirez felt it too, but she buried her grief beneath a hard layer of resolve. Mourning could wait. Survival could not. Harris walked beside her, keeping his voice low. "This isn't just heroics. You changed the outcome of this mission. No one could have predicted your actions." Ramirez shrugged. "I just did what had to be done. The others gave everything, and I carried on." King, still shaken, looked at her with a mixture of reverence and disbelief. "You weren't just brave. You were unstoppable." She allowed herself the faintest of smiles, tinged with sadness. "It wasn't just me," she said softly. "It's every bit of training, every decision, every instinct that kept me alive. And the thought of all of you still counting on me." The team finally began to descend toward the extraction point, their movements slow but purposeful. Ramirez took the rear, eyes scanning constantly, ensuring no threat remained. The mountains, which had seemed so deadly hours before, now felt conquered controlled, if only temporarily. As they reached the clearing where the helicopter would pick them up, the rotor blades churned the air, sending dust and debris into the early morning light. The team climbed aboard carefully, loading the wounded and securing their gear. Ramirez paused briefly, taking one last look at the valley below. The battlefield was quiet, almost serene now, but the echoes of the night would linger forever. Harris approached her as she settled into her seat. "You've earned more than respect tonight. You've earned history," he said quietly, voice carrying the weight of everything that had happened. Ramirez nodded, letting the words sink in without responding. Heroism wasn't for applause. It was for survival, for those who could no longer fight. As the helicopter lifted into the sky, the valley shrinking beneath them, the survivors remained silent for a long time. Some stared at the horizon, lost in thought. Some stared at Ramirez, trying to comprehend the sheer audacity, skill, and courage that had carried them through impossible odds. The radio crackled to life briefly, confirming mission success. The enemy unit had been destroyed, supply lines were secure, and the threat that had loomed over countless innocent lives had been neutralized. Ramirez closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself a moment of respite. The night had demanded everything, and she had given her all. Her body ached, her muscles burned, and grief for her fallen comrades weighed on her, but the mission was complete. Against impossible odds, she had prevailed. Harris spoke again, voice firm but filled with admiration. "We'll need to report this. Every detail, every decision you made. It will be studied for years." Ramirez shook her head. "The details aren't important. The outcome is. We survived, we completed the mission. That's what matters." King leaned back against the helicopter wall, exhaling shakily. "I'll never forget tonight. I'll never forget you." She offered a small nod. "Remember everyone else too," she said softly. "They fought bravely, and some didn't make it. Honor them by living and learning. That's what matters." The helicopter rose higher, carrying the survivors away from the valley. The mountains below slowly faded from view, a silent witness to the night's horrors and triumphs. Ramirez stared out at the horizon, the rising sun reflecting in her eyes. She thought of Dalton Reeves and the others who had fallen, of the lives saved, and of the mission that had seemed impossible. She had faced darkness and emerged victorious. Alone against impossible odds, she had proven that courage, skill, and determination could bend fate. And in that moment, Ramirez understood something vital. Heroism isn't always loud. It isn't always celebrated, and it isn't always shared. Sometimes, heroism is a quiet, solitary act, carried in silence, and witnessed only by those who survived to tell the tale. The helicopter carried them home, but Ramirez's eyes remained fixed on the horizon. The mountains behind them bathed in the first true light of day. The battle was over, the enemy defeated, and against all odds, one woman had changed the outcome. And though the world might never know her name, the valley below would never forget the soldier who had turned impossible into inevitable.